1975 was an incredible year for music, perhaps one of the greatest of all time, which is why it's stunning to me, quite frankly, that all of the music released in 1975 turns 50 this year in 2025. That's half a century, people. Hey there, Swan Shadow here. Welcome back to The Nest. This is the first in a series of 3 videos in which we're going to look back on and celebrate some of the albums that, for me as an avid music listener, are among the most memorable from that spectacular year of 1975. We'll look at 10 albums in this video, 10 more in the next, and another 10 in the third, with probably some honorable mentions at the end. There's a cheat or two along the way where I've paired up albums released by the same artist in the same year, so bonus for you. As we go through this, please keep the following points in mind. Number 1, this list represents my individual preferences. It's not intended as a definitive qualitative analysis. It's not the best albums of 1975, in other words. Who can say what those are? These are simply records that I have enjoyed and that made some enduring impression on me personally. Your list, should you choose to compile one, may and indeed should be different from mine. Number 2, this list is not a ranking. That would have made this exercise much too difficult. I put these in more or less random order, with some attempt to vary the musical genre from one album to the next, just to keep things unpredictable and interesting. And number 3, I've included original studio albums only. No live albums or compilations in this list. With that, on we go. 10 memorable albums celebrating their golden anniversaries in 2025. It should come as no surprise to frequent viewers of this channel that we begin the list with a release by my favorite musical act. Which reminds me, if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment to do that now. And please give this video a thumbs up while you're at it. Thanks so much. Katy Lied is the 4th studio album by Steely Dan, and the first in what I might call their post-band era. At this point, Donald Fagen and Walter Becker have fully disassembled the original core lineup, taken the wheels off the touring bus, and are hereafter hunkering down in the recording studio with the finest session players money could hire. This album is also noteworthy in the Steely Dan canon due to the arrival of a previously unknown backup vocalist by the name of Michael McDonald. When you first hear those unmistakable pipes on the album's second track, Bad Sneakers, you immediately know that something magical has just happened. In addition, Katy Lied includes the first contributions to a Steely Dan recording by guitar wizard Larry Carlton, who, like McDonald, would help define the Steely Dan sound for the rest of the decade. Katy Lied is a gorgeous listen throughout, but in particular, it contains 2 of my favorite dozen Steely Dan numbers: the pulse-pounding opening track, Black Friday, and the sensationally slinky Dr. Wu. The Who by Numbers has always been one of the more unappreciated albums in The Who's catalog, and I've never quite understood why. Granted, it's not as ambitious as Tommy or Quadrophenia, nor is it as jaw-droppingly brilliant as the band's masterpiece, Who's Next. But there's a wealth of amazing rock and roll on this record. Side 1 of the original LP stands with The Who's finest, in my humble opinion. And for my money, Pete Townshend's songwriting is as thoughtful and compelling here as it is anywhere in the band's catalog. The opening track, Slip Kid, survived from Townshend's abandoned Lifehouse epic. It's a biting warning about the dangers of the music business, or any other cannibalistic institution you choose. It features some of Keith Moon's tastiest percussion. More cowbell, anyone? And one of Townshend's hookiest guitar riffs. Squeezebox, the lone chart single on the album, drips with innuendo so quirky that even the band members never quite agreed on what it was supposed to mean. However much I booze, Townsend's open acknowledgement of his alcohol addiction contrasts a relentlessly cheery instrumental background with some of Pete's most darkly self-flagellating lyrics. My favorite tune on the album, Dreaming from the Waste, strikes me as the rock music equivalent of T.S. Eliot's classic ode to aging masculinity, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. The older I get, and man am I getting old, the more I identify with Townsend's palpable frustration and inability to cope. This track serves up more of Moon's borderline uncontrolled drumming alongside a world-class bass solo by John Entwistle, who also drew the record's whimsical cover art. The Who by Numbers deserves reconsideration as one of The Who's most solid, accessible recordings. Music by Numbers? I hardly think so. One of the rare soundtrack albums that completely eclipsed its film, Earth, Wind & Fire's sixth studio recording stands on its own as a monument in the band's legacy. I have an extremely vague memory of seeing That's the Way of the World, which starred Harvey Keitel as a record producer working with an up-and-coming ensemble played by Earth, Wind & Fire themselves during its theatrical release. But I recall almost nothing about the experience apart from the music. That's the Way of the World serves up three of Earth, Wind & Fire's most enduring hits. The incendiary Shining Star, the band's only single to top the Billboard Hot 100, shows off Earth, Wind & Fire at their hard-charging best, propelled by the chunky, funky guitar of Al McKay. The track rocks so hard that Sandy Pearlman, best known as the producer, manager, and occasional lyricist of Blue Oyster Cult, proclaimed Earth, Wind & Fire as, quote, the closest thing to a black heavy metal band. The album's title number, That's the Way of the World, pulls things back into a smooth, mellow groove, showcasing the band's stellar horn section. The philosophical lyrics are characteristic of the band's co-founder, Maurice White, who always sought to weave positive, spiritual messages into the band's material. Reasons, the album's featured ballad, brings forward the soaring falsetto of lead vocalist Philip Bailey. This tune was a popular wedding jam for decades, a fact which confounded the band given that the song's lyrics chronicle a one-night stand that ends in disillusionment. What will not end in disillusionment, however, is a listening session with this classic album. I'm going to step out on a limb here and suppose that most of you have never heard of Crack the Skye. That's okay. You're in excellent company. Most of the music listening world has never heard of Crack the Skye. For you at least, that condition ends today. Crack the Skye is more than a little bit challenging to describe, which accounts in part for why they never became more famous, despite years of touring in support of such major headliners as Kansas, Styx, Supertramp, Rush, Heart, and even Frank Zappa. As you might guess from that list, Crack the Skye is generally thought of as a progressive rock band. And they are that, but progressive in a style entirely unique to themselves. You'll hear some slight similarities here and there to some of those higher profile acts, but Crack the Skye doggedly made music their own way, which again circles back to the reasons you've probably never heard of them before just now. Their self-titled debut is as good an introduction to Crack the Skye as any of their 30 or so albums, quite a few of which are live recordings or compilations of one sort or another. You get a sense of lead singer and songwriter John Palumbo's quirky sensibility, as well as the potent musicianship of the rest of the band. Guitarists Rick Witkowski and Jim Griffiths can crank with the best of them, and the rhythm section of Joe Maker on bass and Joey D'Amico on drums provides rock-solid punch. The standout track for me is Ice, but Hold On, Surf City, the gorgeous Sea Epic, and the catchy sort of Steely Dan meets the Beatles, I Don't Have a Tie, are all fine representations of what these guys were up to. The next time you're in the mood for something maybe a little outside the usual box, give Crack the Sky a shot. You just might fall in love with something. Bruce Springsteen is what I like to call a cliff artist. By that, I mean I really like his early recordings, but then at a certain point, he falls off a cliff, and I don't much care for anything he did after that. Fortunately, before the cliff, there was Born to Run. By the way, keep watching this channel. We're going to do a video on cliff artists or cliff bands in the very near future. Born to Run is about as perfect a Springsteen album as I can imagine the boss making. All of the songs are terrific. The E Street Band is firing on all cylinders. And there's a hunger and earnestness underpinning everything that still sounds exciting to this day. I've never really been a fan of Springsteen's attempt at wall of sound production. It makes the record noisy in a way that I don't really think it benefits from. But the performances work so well that I can forget the muddiness. Side question, did the wall of sound style ever make anything better? The title track is beautiful and brilliant, but it might not even be my favorite song on the album. Not when you have Thunder Road, She's the One, 10th Avenue Freeze Out, and even the overlong Jungle Land. Almost every 9.5-minute song you can name would improve if it were a 6-minute song. Jungle Land is not the exception to this rule. With the possible exception of the album Born in the USA, which always felt like a purposeful how many hits can I bang out sort of effort, though not necessarily in a bad way, Springsteen's songcraft has never been as tight and consistent as it is on Born to Run. I would probably enjoy Bruce's last 40 years of output more if more of it were like this. There was a time, let's call it the 1970s, when Aerosmith was America's greatest rock and roll band. Then there was a time, let's call it everything after 1979, when Aerosmith was America's greatest waste of rock and roll talent. Fortunately, before the former melted into the latter, we got albums like Toys in the Attic. Toys in the Attic, the band's third studio album, shows Aerosmith at the peak of their powers. Sure, there are the iconic hits, Sweet Emotion, and the original pre-Run DMC, Walk This Way, but also all kinds of tough, bluesy rock, from the crunchy title track to the soaring, lushly orchestrated closing number, You See Me Crying. I can even forgive the silly novelty cover, big 10-inch record, because everything else on the record is just so solid. Don't sleep on the hidden gems here, like the emotionally fraught Uncle Salty, with co-writer Tom Hamilton doubling on rhythm guitar as well as his usual bass. And the thunderous, Led Zeppelin-esque Round and Round, where Brad Whitford gets to step out of Joe Perry's shadow and display his own ferocious lead guitar chops. Here's an unpopular opinion. Brad Whitford is actually a much superior player to the very skilled but overrated Joe Perry. Take that for what it's worth. Listening to Toys in the Attic can't help but make me a little sad. Hearing what Aerosmith was capable of before they descended into the puddle of cash-grabbing claptrap where they've resided for the past 4 decades. Steven Tyler's declining vocal health makes it unlikely, but what a treat it would be to get one more album of Aerosmith doing what only they could do. Alas, we'll just have to content ourselves with the monumental 70s albums, of which Toys in the Attic just might be the pinnacle. America's greatest progressive rock band released 2 studio albums, their second and third, in 1975. These 2 records find Kansas emerging fully into their own musically after a solid and stunning debut the year prior. The title track from Song for America removes all doubt that Kansas had come to play. It's a grand, glorious 10-minute epic that earns every second of its running time. Steve Walsh and Robbie Steinhardt switch off lead vocals, then join in powerful harmonies, while Walsh and composer Kerry Livgren duel on keyboards. Steinhardt's signature violin makes its presence felt both as a complementary element and via a sweeping solo. All the while, one of the most underrated rhythm sections in rock history, Philly Hart on drums, Dave Hope on bass, propels the music forward with dramatic force. Icarus, Born on Wings of Steel, the third track on Mask, was the song that hooked me into Kansas fandom, and it remains my favorite Kansas number to this day. Its evocative lyrics recall the myth of the boy who flew too close to the sun, and those lyrics are accompanied by some of Livgren's finest music and one of Walsh's most emotionally supercharged vocal readings. That I can call out just one superlative song from each of these two albums belies the fact that both albums are jam-packed with potent sounds from the opening note of each to the last. It's always been a source of frustration that most people know Kansas primarily for two radio hits, one of which, Dust in the Wind, really isn't typical of anything else they've ever done, without realizing the wealth of great music the band has put forward aside from those two worthy tracks. In the albums Song for America and Mask, you can hear the groundwork for those hits, but also a fully formed platform from which those songs would eventually launch. An aesthetic note, the cover of Song for America marks the debut of what would become one of the most recognizable logos in rock music. Why it was temporarily abandoned on Mask? And no, I don't know what else is going on with that cover either. Before it returned for the next several Kansas albums remains a mystery. I had to stop myself from typing self-titled debut in the captions, because although this album does indeed bear the name of the vocal quartet that recorded it, it's not technically the Manhattan Transfer's first album. That would be Jukin, released 4 years earlier and with a much different lineup and stylistic approach. The 1975 self-titled recording, however, is the first to feature what most fans would think of as the original Manhattan Transfer lineup, even if it's not exactly that, as well as their recognizable musical style. The Manhattan Transfer, the album, finds the namesake foursome doing that vocal jazz thing they did for so long. It's a mix of classic tunes, mostly dating from the 1930s and 40s, spotlighting the vocal talents of group founder Tim Hauser on bass and baritone, Janice Siegel on alto, Laurel Massey on soprano, and Alan Paul on tenor. The highlights of the album include the opening number, Tuxedo Junction, the gospel-inflected Operator, which became the Transfer's first chart single, hitting number 22 on the Billboard Hot 100, an a cappella reading of Gloria, and of course a cover of the Mills Brothers' Java Jive, which would become one of the Transfer's signature numbers. All 12 of the songs sparkle with the group's impeccable harmonies. If this record has a weakness, it's that it's a bit all over the place. The Transfer shines best on the traditional jazz standards which comprise most of the selections. When they venture off into, say, disco, as on Clap Your Hands, or R&B funk, as on A Cappella, it's somewhat less successful. Also, and this is more a me thing than a them thing, to be honest, I would have liked to have heard a few more numbers performed without accompaniment, just so the listener could bask in those spectacular voices without them competing with the band. 50 years on, it's easy to forget how big this album was in its time. It landed at number 33 on the pop charts, which today seems unthinkable for an old-school vocal jazz record. Mostly on the basis of this album, The Transfer got their own limited-run network TV variety series during the summer of '75. Then again, Starland Vocal Band's summer series ran for 6 weeks on CBS 2 years later, so maybe that's not the accomplishment I would like to think it was. Bad Company is generally referred to as a supergroup, meaning that all of the members came from other bands that had been successful previously. Vocalist Paul Rodgers and drummer Simon Kirke have been co-founders of Free, best known for All Right Now. Guitarist Mick Ralphs was in Mott the Hoople, as in All the Young Dudes. Bassist Boz Burrell came from King Crimson. And yet, when I hear that word supergroup applied to Bad Company, I sometimes think, but how super were they really? Don't get me wrong, I like Bad Company quite a bit. There's a reason why their second album, Straight Shooter, appears here in a list of 1975 albums that I enjoy. Still, I often have the feeling that the band was somehow less than the sum of its super parts. They were a fine band that made some fine records, but they never seemed to achieve the greatness that their collective pedigree would suggest. Take this album, for example. It contains 3 brilliant songs: Good Lovin' Gone Bad, a cranking blues rock number penned by Mick Ralphs; Feel Like Making Love, the big chart hit from this set. It reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100; and Shooting Star, Paul Rodgers' soulful elegy inspired by fellow rockers, in particular Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, and Jimi Hendrix, who departed this mortal plane much too soon. That's 3 better tracks than a lot of bands could fit into a career, much less one album. But then we have the rest of the record, which is just okay. And that's being generous to the 2 songs written by Simon Kirke, Weep No More and Anna, neither of which quite rises even to the level of just okay. I mean, I get it that it's a band and everyone wants to contribute, but you shouldn't let the drummer compose 1/4 of the album if his writing chops are not up to snuff. There's also the matter of Boz Burrell, who joined King Crimson as a singer and had to be taught how to play bass by Robert Fripp because the band needed a bassist, but who never really got all that terrific at it. In Bad Company, Boz is only playing bass and not singing, and again, he's just okay. Still, those 3 standout tracks, plus a couple more that are decent enough, Deal with the Preacher and Call on Me, earned Straight Shooter my recommendation. The trio of hits always warrant an upward spin of the volume knob and an enthusiastic sing-along whenever they pop up on classic rock radio. That's a worthy legacy for any group. And of course, Bad Company would add a few more enjoyable numbers to the rock lexicon before they were done. I just always wanted this supergroup to be ever so slightly more super. Some might be surprised to find Paul Simon's 4th solo album on this list, given that I'm not really much into the whole singer-songwriter thing. And it's a fact, this will be the only album discussed in this series that falls into that genre, unless you'd characterize Springsteen's Born to Run as a singer-songwriter album, which I wouldn't, but you do you. I do, however, enjoy a lot of Paul Simon's music, both from his collaboration with Art Garfunkel and as a solo artist. I'm not sure if I would rank Still Crazy after all these years as my favorite of Simon's solo efforts, but it's certainly in the top 3 or 4. My favorite track here is Gone at Last, an infectious gospel-flavored duet with Phoebe Snow. But there's plenty more to like. My Little Town, Simon's long-anticipated reunion with Garfunkel, doesn't quite recapture the heights of their earlier partnership, but it still evokes some of the reasons that so many of us loved Simon and Garfunkel. The album's title song finds Simon at his reflective, introspective best. Then there's the slyly subversive 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. Simon's only #1 hit as a solo performer, in which drummer Steve Gadd's martial rhythms underpin Simon's gently conversational lyric. By the way, Paul, we're still wondering what the other 45 ways are. The song only reveals 5. For reasons I can't entirely express, Simon's songwriting resonates with me at a level that few other artists working in a similar style ever reach. Whatever those reasons are, they're fully in force on Still Crazy after all these years. Maybe the reality is that after all these years, I too am still at least a little crazy. There you have it. 10 albums turning 50 in 2025 that are, in my opinion, well worth a revisit if you haven't listened to them in a while. Or a first listen if they happen to have escaped your notice for the past half century. In our next video, we'll consider 10 more outstanding releases from this incredible year in music, 1975. If you tap the notification bell, YouTube will let you know when that video is ready for you. Before you leave, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel if you haven't done that already. We are always grateful for your support of our efforts. Until we see you back here again, please be well and do well to someone. And as always, is there gas in the car? Yes, there's gas in the car.